Hello, we are here back in the WJHL Plus studio, continuing to tell stories of Vietnam veterans as we remember the Vietnam War 50 years later. This is a 10-part series that we are airing on WJHL, but we're also airing some additional features here on our app. And joining me today is retired Army Colonel and Master Army Aviator Tom Reeves. I've had the pleasure of speaking with him several times. Thanks so much for being here today.
Enjoyed being with you again, Ashley.
Well, first off, let's go ahead and get into it. You had two tours in Vietnam, but we delve into your career as a helicopter pilot in our television version of the story. But I want to talk about some very special missions that you had that really kind of shaped your career in the Army.
My most important uh, event and mission occurred March the 21st and 22nd of 1967. I had volunteered in 1965 as a member of the Tennessee Army National Guard to go to Vietnam as a pilot, and they took me because the big buildup for Vietnam was in 1965. I had a grandfather that was World War One in Europe, father World War Two, favorite uncle World War Two. So I really felt like that it was my time to go and volunteer to fight communism. That's what I did. Finished flight school in May of 1966, and sure enough, my entire class of 100 pilots were all sent to Vietnam. Uh, I arrived probably mid June of 1966, transferred to the unit that I flew with, the 170th Assault Helicopter Company, in January, and started flying various missions in the Central Highlands. The Central Highlands were much like the mountains of Unicor County in Irwin, where I live, uh, 3,000, 4,000 feet, dense, covered, and the the further you went to the east towards Cambodia and Laos, the thicker and the deeper the jungles were. Trees, 100, 200 feet deep, uh, tough places to land. But the mission of helicopter pilots in Vietnam was to support the ground troops. We put them in, we promised to come back and get them out.
And I know that you have several awards, well deserved awards from your time in the service, but there are two I want to really talk about and how you got these two. You have the Distinguished Service Cross and the Air Medal for Valor. Tell me what led up to that, because I know you had to be on a very particular mission, right place, right time to be able to get those.
Well, sometimes as a Christian, I think about the fact that God often puts us at the right place at the right time and gives us the decisions to what we're going to do to affect the outcome of that experience or that event. I look back at that particular longest day of my career in the military, uh, the 21st of March 1967, first day of May, or first day of spring it was. And my fellow pilot, Bill Silverstein, warrant officer, my crew chief and door gunner, we had uh, we had been selected by a fourth division colonel, brigade commander. Whenever he flew, he wanted us to fly. We were a good team. He had great confidence in us. So we had that particular day, that morning of 6:30, getting out, getting cranked up, getting ready to pick him up on the 21st of March. That was a VIP flight. We were going to know it was an easy flight, nothing hazardous, nobody shooting at us. Going to get back early, get some chow early, and turn in early and all that. But that day turned out to be the longest day of my life and the most hazardous day of my entire life. Uh, his his guidance to us that day, Ashley, was I want to fly through the Central Highlands and visit the units that I command. A brigade commander commands battalions. He probably had four uh, uh, active combat battalions and one support battalion that he commanded. He was a pretty strong guy. He not a lot of sense of humor. He wanted things done right. He was 100% military. We called his name was Jackson, but he was called Stonewall Jackson. We flew into a particular battalion, uh, probably 10 or 11 o'clock on the 21st, and that unit was the closest to Cambodia and North Vietnamese active troops in the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Uh, they had sent several of their units out in the surrounding jungles to do reconnaissance, to look for signs of enemy activities, those kind of things. Um, we were, our crew, whenever we would land, we would stay with the helicopter. He would visit, and that particular morning, he was in the Tactical Operations Center in a battalion headquarters, and everybody there was under fire at night, mortars, enemy artillery and mortars. They were underground. The command center was underground for safety. And uh, I was just standing there by the aircraft, enjoying my nice morning. And all of a sudden, a lieutenant came running literally out of the Tactical Operations Center underground. And I was a captain at the time. And he called me captain. He says, the colonel wants you. So we went to the Tactical Operations Center. Turned out that there was a combat patrol, long range reconnaissance patrol, four men, and we had been involved with them over the period of time I was in Vietnam. But anyway, they had been inserted into a couple of miles over into Cambodia to hunker down and to be still and to observe enemy activities. Uh, One of their four members, an NCO, a sergeant, had come down with serious malaria and couldn't walk. They had been discovered. They were being fired at. Uh, I They requested immediate extraction. The deal was that there were no helicopters within 20 to 30 miles. We were the only one. So we were asked if we would volunteer to load up this lieutenant and head out towards where they were and see if we could find a way to pick them up, which we did. We rescued them. It was like in a Western movie. I remember that we found no we couldn't land because there was no landing zones or nothing beneath the trees. But I remember as a kid doing a lot of farming and fishing and stuff on rivers that quite often, like the Nolichucky's recent flood, that the lower branches of a lot of trees were washed away. And so my idea was, after I flew over and reconnoitered the area, Ashley, I decided I was going to go down under the upper branches of the trees and hover down to the riverbank and come out and hover up the river a couple of miles to where they were in Cambodia and let them wade out to our helicopter. It worked like a charm, but I remember as I hovered on a rock in the middle of the river, about the size of Nolichucky, that here they came. One guy was carrying the stricken soldier, and I could hear the AKs and the firing. And I had a door gunner, of course, with his weapon firing in their general direction. And they came wading out about 3 feet of water, loaded on, and we got them back in about 5 or 10 minutes back to the unit and saved their lives. Both my crew chief and door gunner and my co-pilot and I were rewarded the Air Medal for Valor for that rescue.
And let's talk a little bit about the Distinguished Service Cross that you received and how you received that one.
Oh, that was later in that same day on that same VIP flight. Nothing going to
Busy
happen.
day.
We're going to get back early. We're going to get back and have chow early, maybe have a cold beer, whatever, early with the guys. But there again, we had flown the Colonel Jackson around and flown back to the air base or to the brigade uh, from the brigade headquarters to the battalion headquarters that we had been with that morning. Um, Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, uh, we had tied the aircraft down. The crew chief had, and we got a heads up that Colonel Jackson was ready to go back to his battalion headquarters, which would end our day. I remember as the crew chief was untying the main rotor blades of our UH-1 Huey helicopter. I heard some shooting up on the side of a hill of small mountain, 3,000, 3,500 feet high. And it sounded like my days as a teenager when I used to go squirrel hunting. You'd use a 22 rifle and you'd go to the woods and shoot squirrels, come back, and that's what you'd have for dinner sometimes. But anyway, it was a pop, pop, pop about 2 or 3 miles away, and I thought that's not supposed to be happening. I mean, we're right there at the battalion headquarters. We're in their confines. Uh, you know what was happening, and it wasn't 3 or 4 minutes later. Here came the same lieutenant that we had worked with that morning on rescuing the long range patrol. Uh, Came out and said, Captain, the colonel needs you quick. Um, I remember this time going back down in the Tactical Operations Center, Ashley, and I could hear on the radio an enlisted man, a private, undoubtedly someone who had been uh, who had not joined the army, but he had been drafted, and he was literally screaming and crying, and I could hear AK-47 fire in the background. And his plea was, he said, "My captain's dead, my lieutenant's dead." He said, "We're surrounded, we're under heavy fire." That was part of that noise, that firing that I heard when I'd been out 5 minutes, 10 minutes earlier, getting ready to untie the aircraft and fly back home. It turned out that uh, there were three American companies that had been out on long range patrol a couple of mile and a half from the battalion headquarters. And they had come under fire and walked into an ambush. There was a huge regimental size North Vietnamese, not Viet Cong. These were skilled, well trained, well equipped North Vietnamese soldiers that had surrounded them. Most of the senior sergeants and officers had been either wounded or killed. The men needed leadership. My request from both the full colonel, Colonel Jackson, and his battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Clinton Granger, was we don't have an air. Once again, no helicopters within 20 to 30 miles. We've got to put a team of officers in. We've got to insert them in the battle area to give directions and to get the troops in a defensive position, or they're going to be overrun. We're talking about 90 to 110 troops. I loaded up the battalion executive officer, Major Crosby, and four or five others. And we, first of all, had to fly through friendly artillery gun target line, which you never do. We had to find a place to land, which we did, and get them as close to the battle area as we could. We got them on the ground. I found an old B 52 bomb crater that had grown up, and we got them on the ground. Uh, we went up to about 3,000 feet, and I circled and stayed in that area. And in about 5 minutes, I got a radio call from Major Crosby, the executive officer. You got to come back and get us. We're too far away. Is there any way you can land? And so we go back in under fire, picked up the team, and found another place where we could insert them. We got them on the ground, and the rest of that day we were spent either lowering supplies. We had a most helicopters had a maybe a 200-foot rope. Well, because we couldn't land, we could lower things down by hand through the trees if we could find the troops on the ground. We had the radio frequency, we could talk to them. We finally found a unit that we could get to, and we had been had about 3 or 4 trips, Ashley, into that location. And we'd gone back to the fire base. We'd loaded up medical supplies, ammunition, jerry cans, 5-gallon cans full of water. When you're in battle, you sweat a lot, you drink a lot of water, use a lot, you need a lot of water. We had lowered those supplies down. It was in the dry season. It was somewhere around 6:30, 7 o'clock, and there were wounded on the ground, but we couldn't pick them up. We weren't a medevac helicopter. A medevac helicopter had come in from Pleiku, some 30 miles away. That was clearly marked with a big red cross. They had a electric winch, and they had a metal basket they could let down through the trees, and the wounded could be placed one at a time. They could bring them up to their hovering helicopter, load up 6 at a time, and fly back to the hospital at Pleiku. The problem with this particular helicopter, and it was a crew, brand new, full of fuel, just left Pleiku. They could not find the spot where this unit was located. The trees were so thick. I got a radio call from the aircraft commander. Uh, my call sign was Bikini 963. And he said, "Is there any way that you could come back and hover in and lead us into the location where these troops are, so we can extract the wounded?" So I turned around. I could see them a mile or two away, and I literally hovered and led them as I hovered across the tops of the trees, and paused and hesitated and called and said, "This is where you need to be." I had moved some 200 football fields, 200 yards, 202 football fields away, uh, headed back to the fire base to get more supplies, when all of a sudden there was a huge explosion. I was at treetop level. I remember that the explosion to the rear of my helicopter was so traumatic, so intense, that it literally, uh, the force moved our helicopter down, nose wise, down into the trees, and I was able to recover and get us well above the trees. What had happened was we had made those 3 or 4 trips into that area, resupplying that Army infantry company on the ground. The North Vietnamese had moved in an RPG soldier, uh, rocket propelled grenade. They were, in those days, they were Russian B-40, B-40 anti-aircraft weapons. that was meant to take our aircraft out. Instead, as soon as the medevac helicopter got in position and hovered and started to let that basket down, that metal uh, extraction unit down, the gunner on the ground fired his B-40 rocket. They were full of fuel. They exploded, a tremendous tremendous explosion. Even injured men on the ground, U.S. Army soldiers on the ground. Um, that was the first worst thing that happened that particular mission. The rest of the afternoon and night, as dark fell, was being able to fly to different units, lower things, lower supplies down through the trees, and we ended up that as the night fell, the Air Force came in with different aircraft firing missions. The problem with nighttime flying for helicopters is there was an aircraft that was Air Force aircraft, cargo aircraft, dropping flares from about 1,000 feet above the battle area. The flares had parachutes on them, and the flares, when they burn out, if they came on down in the dark and got in your tail rotor or your main rotor, it would sure mess up your day of flying a helicopter because they don't work well when they get tangled up in tree limbs or parachutes or flare canisters. So we were able to, thank goodness, again, God protected us totally on this mission. We uh, we were able to get through those. Uh, as I would fly back to the fire base and uh, and pick up supplies to try to get to the troops on the ground through the trees, there was a North Vietnamese mortar team that started firing at us whenever we'd land. They were firing on a hillside quite a way, and they had a good range. And so I sort of got perturbed about that because I had a job to do. And I came up to air to altitude where I could see them when they fired. There was a stream of fire and smoke that came out of the tube when they launched a round. So I was able to contact a gunship helicopter, and they went in and took them out. So I did a little fire support that day. We got back down and continued to support the ground troops. We were able to get more supplies in. Uh, Later in the night, 10, 11, 12 o'clock, it was a moonless night. There was no moon out that night. We were able to actually find a way to hover down under the tree limbs with my crew chief and door gunner facing out and to the rear of the aircraft. I could see fine out front. My co-pilot could, but to the rear we couldn't see the tail rotor. The tail rotor is what allows a helicopter to fly right or left or turn it, because flying a helicopter takes both hands and both feet. You can't take just one hand, and helicopters today have autopilots. They didn't in those days. So they had to make sure that as I hovered down and came under these 200 feet trees and their tree limbs, that I could back up and move sideways and forward with a range of 4 or 5 feet uh, to spare and get down to where I could actually hover on a huge log on the side of of a small mountain where they had moved the where they had moved the severely injured, and I was able to move them and rescue them, maybe three or four or five at a time. Sometimes I still think and maybe even dream about that dark, deep hole that we had to fly in. Now, the only way I could see what we were doing, is that we had a landing light that was under the aircraft, under the Huey, that I could move right or left, up or down, And so I kept it faced straight down, and that gave me a halo of light where I could see that light coming up, and that's how I was able to maneuver safely and get in and out 4 or 5 times in that particular. And finally, at 2 o'clock in the morning, according to the eyewitness statement from Colonel Granger, the battalion commander, he was the last person, he and a couple of his officers, that we took out. The next day was interesting. In the eyewitness statement that you have, that we've read together, he states that the enemy retreated across the border. And the next day, as they came in, as 4 helicopters came in to clean up and rescue and pull out the rest of the troops in that dark black hole we've been flying in that night, 3 of them crashed and they weren't under fire. The other interesting thing about that 14 hours of log flight time, because we got back to our air base about 3 o'clock in the morning and we'd left at 6:30 the day before. The interesting thing about that particular day, that's hard to believe, is that though we've been fired at consistently, day and night, going back to picking the alert team up, we didn't. When the crew chief got up and crewed the aircraft, got it ready for the next flight that morning, there wasn't a single round that hit that aircraft. Not a single round for that entire 14 hours of flight time. Another interesting thing, which I have often thought about or have thought about, is that when you look at the flight records of that aircraft, the crew that came out to fly it the next morning about 8 or 9 o'clock, when they took off, the engine failed and they went down. That would have been my last flight down in those trees. If that had happened, we would have crashed on top of all of those troops we were trying to help pull out, and Colonel Granger and others. And I've often thought about the divine will of God and the power of prayer. And this Easter, yesterday, I had a lot of time to think about the miracles of the power of Easter and of what we had and what we did. 1968 at Fort Campbell, between my 2 tours in Vietnam, I was called by the Chief of Staff and told that I was being awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, a very rare award for helicopter pilots. In fact, in Vietnam, out of 1,600 or so Distinguished Service Crosses awarded for the entire war, only 900 were awarded to troops alive, to recipients alive. The rest were posthumous. They had passed away. And I was awarded that in December of 1968 at Fort Campbell before my second and last tour to Vietnam. That's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing because I know that that is an incredible mission and something that, like you said, you've had time to reflect on the last couple of decades. But we're going to take a break right here and continue on telling Mr. Reeves' story in just a bit. So stick with us. Thank you so much for sticking with us as we continue to share the story of Mr. Tom Reeves for our Vietnam War series as we reflect on the Vietnam War 50 years later. Thank you so much for sticking with us, Mr. Reeves. I'm excited to continue this story. Let's talk a little bit, though, about what point you knew that the Vietnam conflict would be lost to the North Vietnamese, because you said that you had a feeling way before the U.S. started to pull out.
Actually, I had the feeling while they were pulling out.
Hmm.
Uh, when we closed on the last segment, I had mentioned that I had been decorated with the Distinguished Service Cross during my tour at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Um, I finished my first tour in June of 1967 and came back stateside. And during that period of time while stationed at Fort Campbell, which was nice because my hometown's Nashville and I could visit family easy, um, I flew a mission for a brigadier general who was stationed at the Pentagon. He had been at Fort Campbell visiting the general and chief staff, whatever. I was a captain, I was on flight status. And my pilot and myself flew him down to Nashville to the airport so he could fly back to Washington. Um, I had been a general's aide as a second lieutenant in the Army National Guard, so I knew how to take care of senior officers. So while my pilot friend stayed with our aircraft, I accompanied him inside to make sure he got on his flight back to Washington and had his luggage with him and so on and so forth. Well, sure enough, the flight was delayed about a half an hour, 40 minutes or so. So we found a comfortable seat, got him settled in. I went back, told Bob to cut the engines off. We were going to have a delay, and I went back and had some conversation. Didn't want him sitting alone. Talked about the military, my first tour a little bit, and it turned out that the Army has different uh, uh, organizations. We've got the engineers, we got infantry, we've got armor, we've got the medical corps, we've got military police, the medical corps, different branches of service. My branch at that time was still infantry. So as we sat there and talked, he asked me about my future and my career and what I was interested in. So I told him about the fact that during my college ROTC training, I was fortunate enough to be one of those cadets chosen to receive a private pilot's training at the local airport in Murfreesboro, where Middle Tennessee state is still located, and that I had a fixed wing license as pilot's license and training as well as rotor wing. And he said if you could fly the OV-1 Mohawk, which was the most sophisticated, uh, uh, exciting aircraft the Army had. Every pilot in the Army that wanted to fly wanted to be a Mohawk pilot, OV-1 Mohawk. It was a surveillance aircraft designed to use infrared and radar and day and night photo capabilities to find and fix the enemy on the ground. And there were units deployed to Vietnam. For some reason, the military, Department of Defense, Department of Army, decided that they were going to transfer this particular mission and this aircraft to the control of the Army Intelligence Branch. I had I had been wise enough during my career in the Army National Guard part time to take several different courses. We didn't have computers in, so they were all books and tests and mail in and that sort of stuff. But I took a basic course in Army intelligence and passed it, so I was qualified as an Army intelligence branch officer. He asked me, he said, if we could uh, get you into flight school to fly the Mohawk, would you consider transferring from your present branch to the Army intelligence branch? And without hesitation, I said, yes, sir. Got him on his flight, got back to Fort Campbell. 2 weeks later, the chief of staff in the Pentagon for the Army Intelligence Branch calls and says, you're going to be an Army Intelligence, you're now in Army Intelligence Branch, change your branch. You're going to be getting orders from Fort Rucker and you're going to be flying the B-1 Mohawk. That led to my second tour, which began in, again, about mid June of 1970. I flew a lot into Cambodia. I flew over the area that I had flown helicopters in, the Central Highlands, uh, uh, Ansley back in 66, 67. So I was familiar with the area, but I was doing a lot of nighttime radar missions in Cambodia and fixing and picking up a lot of enemy movements at night because the North Vietnamese had enhanced their capability logistically and militarily, and were moving more and more troops, including tanks and trucks, down through the Ho Chi Minh Trail into the Central Highlands. I enjoyed flying, uh, wonderful aircraft. Um, I learned a lot, but in early January of 1971, I get this call into the office of my company commander, and he said, "Tom, you're being transferred to Military Assistance Command in Vietnam to Saigon. Get your bags packed and get on down to Saigon." I had no idea what to expect. I mean, here I was coming out of the cockpit, uh, very skilled, very successful, flying totally different missions. My second tour. I get to Saigon and I am briefed and given, and I realize, and what the intelligence uh, division at General Abrams staff needed was they had these aircraft picking up all of this intelligence information about enemy troops and where they were and what they were doing, but they didn't know what to do with the information that was being sent from the field from these units to Saigon. So I was the very first military intelligence branch officer to be assigned as a pilot in Vietnam. Got there again in June of 70 and ended up as their first pilot with intelligence branch brass on in 1971. And I knew what I was doing, but I couldn't get the colonels or anybody else to listen. I had a top secret SI clearance. That was the highest security clearance you could get at that time. I remember from my office and from the intelligence division I worked in, working with the CIA, the missions over China in the SR 71 flying at 60,000 feet. Uh, and the Chinese could never shoot them down. They finally, years later, shot Gary Powers down. But um, I would share information with other intelligence officers, and uh, I came up with targets that verified or warranted a B 52 strike. B 52s could take out enormous amounts of equipment and logistics and supplies and troops on the ground. I never was successful. I could pinpoint by a 6-digit coordinate where the enemy troops were in Cambodia and Laos. Could never get a mission, could never get a strike. You got to recall that Military Assistance Command in Vietnam also contained general officers and senior officers of the Vietnamese Army and Air Force and Navy. I began to suspect that there were a lot of leaks going on, especially through those senior ranking South Vietnamese officers. Um, One of the things that took place, the withdrawal from Vietnam, when I got back in 71, units were already being pulled out from Vietnam. I was there at the beginning, flight school in fall of 65. I was there in 66, big build up, a lot of divisions in Vietnam, a lot of American troops. And I was there at the beginning of the end, as I call it, because uh, I was able to figure out that that this particular military event, the war in Vietnam, we were never going to lose it. We were never, excuse me, we were never going to win it. There were too many leaks. Uh, the South Vietnamese troops were too passive. They didn't have command, good, strong command leadership. Uh, the battle that had begun in February the 8th through March 25th in Cambodia, called Lam Song 719, was supposed to be a successful 18,000 Vietnamese troop event. No Americans were involved except flying helicopters and flying support aircraft. No American ground troops were involved, but it was a dismal failure. In 45 days, uh, the South Vietnamese military uh, were totally destroyed and licked their wounds and came back across the border. Um, I remember going, and I was a career officer at that time. I loved the military. I was going to stay in. I had some good assignments ahead of me. I had a good career ahead of me. But I realized that President Nixon was not getting, as Commander in Chief, the information he needed. It was so poor that after he found out about the Lam Song 719 defeat with the South Vietnamese, he considered relieving General Creighton Abrams, who was my boss. General Abrams, if you recall, had had replaced the initial commander in Vietnam, General Creighton Abrams, a very highly respected, very successful commander. Um, so, at any rate, I remember in April of 1971, I made the decision that I'm not going to stay in the military. There's going to be some big drawdowns. The president is not being told the truth. Uh, I felt uneasy being a part of it. And so I went in and told my lieutenant colonel commander, I'm not going to remain in the military. When I finish my tour in June, I'm going back to Tennessee and rejoin the Tennessee National Guard, which I did. Now, looking back at history, all my hunches, my instincts that I had as a seasoned first or seasoned captain that had been there, done that, and knew what needed to be done. My instincts were, unfortunately, they were correct.
And when you saw the fall of Saigon happen and you saw it unfold on television, what was your reaction?
Oh, it was sickening. It was such a disaster. The Vietnamese people are sweet people. They're wonderful people. But they're not war fighters. The North Vietnamese, you got to understand, under communism, either you do what you're ordered to do, or you're going to become slave laborers, or you're going to be dealt with. Uh, the this, we tried. The United States tried to mold the South Vietnamese army after our army. They didn't have enough time. They didn't have the same culture, the same background. And when I saw the Paris peace talks, which the North Vietnamese signed and said we will honor those, there will be a separate country, North Vietnam. There'll be a separate country, South Vietnam. When they broke through and assaulted Saigon, within 48 hours in 1975, they had positioned themselves. The Vietnamese gave up, surrendered. Um, the, the military pilots that could fly helicopters literally flew out to the fleet in the Gulf of I think it was the Gulf of Tonkin, but off the coast from Saigon. They flew in and landed on anything they could. There were so many almost new UH-1H helicopters that the Navy had to push them over the side to make room for more. Uh, They carried their wives, they carried their kids, their dogs, their cats, anything they could to get out. And that was the only way they had to get out because they knew that when the North Vietnamese, the communists, took over, there'd be severe retributions to be paid for anybody that had any history of being supportive of the South Vietnamese government, and, and especially if they were in their military. It was a sad feeling. It was very. I hated to have the thought that my instincts and intuitions back in '71, when all the U.S. Army troops were being pulled out, Marines being pulled out, Air Force being pulled out, that the South Vietnamese would never be able to hold it on their own. And I was right.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to not only share your time in Vietnam, but some of the insight that you had as somebody that was so high ranking and had one of the highest security clearances at the time. You were kind of in the ins and outs, and you knew more than what the average person could even know today. And so I appreciate you for sharing that with us. But before we end things, I do want to end on a lighter note. When I did this interview with Mr. Reeves a few weeks ago for our television series, he actually gave me this photo. It is folded for a reason, and he signed the top of it for me. But tell me where you were in this time. This is one of my favorite things that I've received from a Veterans Voices interview. So tell me where you were at and what you were doing, because I mean this was awesome to receive, and I just think it just kind of shows where you were in the time and what was happening.
That was made in February of 1971 in front of my desk in the intelligence department at the Military Assistance Command Vietnam in Saigon. So I had about 5.5 months of actually being in Saigon,
Hmm.
knowing the people, knowing the city, living in a reserved hotel for officers at that time, and becoming very caring for the South Vietnamese people. Very beautiful, nice, peaceful, kind, caring culture.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and also for sharing this. I just had to show this to everybody because, like I said, it's one of my favorite things that I've received on a Veterans Voices shoot. But again, thank you so much for sticking with us and for sharing your story multiple times and helping us to contribute to this very important series that continues to tell the story of those who were there on the ground in Vietnam.
Making sure history is correct.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, again, we will continue telling the stories of other veterans and sharing the history of what led up to the Vietnam War, what happened during the Vietnam War, and even how it shapes our American culture when it comes to military operations overseas today. That's all in our series, The Vietnam War 50 Years Later. So continue to check that out. And again, thanks for joining us for this.